Welcome to our talk about open source, EU funding and agile methods. And we will talk about our experiences in the PyPy project. And we had a presentation about the technical aspects yesterday. And today we will talk about the methodology aspects. What happens when you bring a lot of people from different cultures together and then receive some EU funding. Let's see what happens. My name is Bea During, and my co-talker is Holger Krekel. And I will start off just explaining a bit about what we'll talk about. And then Holger will continue. So in that sense, we would like you to participate in this talk, to contribute, right? So if you have any questions, please don't wait till the end. Just interrupt us and we will answer your questions to the best of our abilities, right? So we will start with presenting how the community around PyPy evolved, the history of the project, but also the community, and what happened during the time we went for the EU funding aspects. And how did that transform? And a bit about how the development process among the developers work. Then I will continue talking about the agile practices that we use, the key practice being sprints. What is that? How is it done? And in what sense does that have to do with the Agile manifesto? And then we will sum up in the end with talking about the problems of managing diversities, different cultures. And so we will spend quite a lot of spreading our own experience about the project. Okay, so Holger, would you like to start?
So this is a brief overview how the technical development actually started. We got together in 2003, and we're like 3 people basically discussing on a, I think, German mailing list actually, that we would like to write a new Python implementation and had some ideas on why this makes sense. And the kickoff was basically then an invitation because there was some prior experiences in attending coding meetings, sprints. We get into this much more later. And that came from ZOAP 3. I had attended there a couple of sprints, and that's the new generation of ZOAP. Maybe some of you know that. It's a web application framework, and I found some aspects of the collaboration of how people work there very interesting. So I thought that it's a good idea to actually get together in this way, sit together for a week, and start a project. So we did this, and the participants actually got to know each other at conferences that they previously attended. So, yes, next slide. The key elements of our technical development, because we were all technical people at that point getting together, was test-driven development. We, like, from the start, said, okay, we want to have an evolving code base, want to have like small ideas, and incrementally, evolutionary, have small tested pieces that fit together, because there were positive experiences about this. And we also had all strong background in like Python culture, which is, there's something called the Zen of Python. If you are ever at the Python prompt, you can just say import this, and you get a few principles that apply there, which are differentiated from like Perl or so in some senses. And also another decision that we took very early is that we wanted to have first all the concepts right. So we wanted to have something correct before really going for speed issues. So in those we were very, in those decisions we were very, had the same opinion, so we could basically start off from that. And then evolutionary, step by step, we met a couple of times and worked together with like 10 people or so. Also teaching each other what we know and evolving it. So just to give you an overview, the time scale is out there, I'm sorry about this. That basically starts in 2003, and you see the yellow lines are the meetings we had, and you see that basically the last sprint before the EU funding starts is around here. And then we have these meetings, and this is the lines of code development. So it usually took jumps, and here's the release. I think here we did some kind of international Unicode integration, so it jumped up with a lot of lines of code here. And then you see also that this intensified during the EU-funded period. The red line shows the number of tests. So it's at the moment at something like 300,000 lines or something of tests, and around 150,000 lines of source code for the Python implementation. Okay. So a few words about the Python community as far as I can tell you about it. It has strong open source background. It's a language that is very much implemented within the open source community. It's not driven by a company or anything. It's driven by volunteers around the world. Also the language design process. And it's supposed to be a language that is very good for integration with C libraries and lots of different other languages and libraries. And also very noticeable is, at least that's what I noticed when I came into the community something like 2001 or so, is that there's very few flaming going on in the community. It's not like there are like really different, many different projects, but it's not that they hate each other or something and like have like huge fights on mailing lists. Of course, there are some arguments on mailing lists, but it's not like a huge divorce and huge fights about something. And has like 60% of the people downloading Python, playing with it, come from the Windows environments, and also lots of people from Unix environments. So also there it's quite mixed. Then we have 4 Python implementations at the moment. And these 4 implementations, I'm not going into details there, they also have some kind of collaboration. So even there's not such a big fight like you had in the 70s or 80s between Lisp implementations, where there were even different commercial interests and really fighting each other. So some of the agile aspects in the technical environment were basically focused around the sprints. These one-week meetings that Bea is going to talk a lot more. And the people and the community basically arose also in Europe at least around the first EuroPython conference. I think it was in 2002, and from then on it's yearly. And what is very important is that all large projects in the Python world, and there are quite a few, maybe you've heard of Plone or you have heard of Twisted or whatever, they all employ the same basic concepts of testing and evolutionary design. So there's usually not any UML diagrams that you generate something from or so, but it's really many people collaborating and sitting together and discussing things. And there's a lot of test tools available. And actually at the next EuroPython, which is going to be at CERN in June, there's also going to be its own around all these practices of testing and agility. Okay. So what is it in PyPy? The project that is now existing since 2.5 years or 3 years almost. It's that we have tests for getting semantics right. And if we want to optimize something, then we try to identify what exactly we want to optimize, write a test case first, and see that everything works correctly there. So again, a number that is interesting is we have around 3,000 tests that we wrote within the Python implementation. Okay? So to give a bit of an overview of the project itself, it is 2003 we started with like a couple of one-week meetings, and then in mid-2003 we realized, okay, it's all fine, but here we are really writing a complete language implementation and a complete compiler to actually make this usable on its own and not depend on another Python implementation. And that is something that is really a lot of effort actually. And so we realized if we actually want to get this at any time soon, to come into production, to be usable in the real world, we have to really work more or less full-time. Because up until then, it's only really meeting for these 1 week, discussing in between, then sorting out the next opportunity to meet, and getting together again. And it evolved, and rather quickly, but still it became very clear that it's not possible to actually go on like this. Well, it's possible, but it might take like 10, 20 years, so, well. And that's why the idea for EU funding was born. We were from different countries, and we thought, well, that should fit with EU research, we discovered that there's something there's some fitting call. That's what the EU calls for certain participation in proposals. So we went for that, and we also, the same way we developed the code, we also made a project plan and a proposal, a technical proposal, version controlled and all kinds of things, and came up with a plan for actually carrying out a project over 2 years and getting it funded by the EU. So, yes, next one. So that was actually submitted in October 2003, so after 2 or 3 months of asking some people around. And then what the EU does, it has a completely independent panel of experts that are not employed by the EU. They're just contracted to review independently from the whole bureaucracy the technical proposals. And they give points for certain, like, do they fulfill the actual objectives and all? And there we passed. So once you have a proposal that gets accepted by the independent panel of reviewers, then you enter the negotiation phase, so-called, with the EU. And that is then something where you deal with all the forms and procedures of the EU. And that then basically, I think we got the acceptance note just before Christmas 2003, and then it took 1 year of negotiation and finalization of the actual contract. For various reasons, there was like lots of open questions, and then the project actually started at December 2004, so just about a year ago. And it's a 2-year project, and there's around 1.3 million euros of funding. The project budget is something like 2.3 millions, and we get into the which companies are involved, universities are involved later. What we did during this phase for preparing the proposal is that we divided lots of different aspects of what we wanted to do in 14 work packages. And we also had some kind of basic organization where we built on what we actually had done before and done this more regularly and described this more in detail. And also part of the project is actually documenting this process, like how it works, how we actually do this. And I'd dare to say actually that this proposal work and the things we have to fulfill to the EU also helped us to actually, which is kind of unusual maybe in an open source project, especially in a like evolving one, to actually have a plan. Like, we want to do this milestone, we want to have this and that done by that time, and then the next phase is going to do this and that. I mean, I know that there are projects, but usually there are larger projects like the Apache project or something that do this kind of roadmap planning. So there are really some positive backfeed aspects about the technical work that we did there and had to do and describe for the EU. Yes? So when it comes to thinking about the various levels that were involved by that time, like in 2004, we have still the main force, which is the developers group that actually works. We have the companies and the organizations through which they work, because individuals cannot take part in a new project really. They have to work through an organization. And those companies, for example, only receive 50% of what they actually have to pay for salaries. So there's the question, how can these companies actually get to the other 50% of the money? So that's one of the ongoing and pervasive questions throughout the whole project. And, well, the EU also, honestly, is looking for open source and for open source projects, true, real open source projects, and they actually want to fund them. And they do have objectives that are like, open platforms is the objective. Development of open platforms is the one that we are in. And it's, they actually want to have challenging goals. It's a research program, so it means that you should not do something that everybody else has done already, but you should try to do something that is really challenging. And they are even recognizing, okay, there are risks, you might not actually succeed. So it's not really so, it's not actually so bad if if you think about the interest the EU has in this, apart from, of course, all the procedures you have to fulfill. And then it's at all these levels, developers, companies, universities, working together at various levels, also collaboration with the community and all. It's always about finding models that fit, basically, for the various people and organizations involved. And that's hard work in some way. You have to like determine, okay, what is your interest, and how does it fit together, how can we work together, and well. So maybe that's more like a personal perspective. It's not like the project's rules or something, but something that me and also a lot of other people know. It's about some principles of free cooperation. Just a brief word, it's from Christoph Speer. He's like, I think, from Bremen. He wrote something which is called Foundation of Free Cooperation. It's very general. It's not just applicable to open source. In German, it's eine Grundlegung der freien Kooperation. And I think it's a very interesting thing because it has only 4 rules, 4 basic rules, and it's really applicable in many, many situations, also in free software projects, I think. The rules are you can basically do any kind of collaboration model you want, including appointing someone for becoming a dictator, saying, okay, this guy takes the last decision. That's fine. You can agree on this. As long as you at the same time allow all the time that you can change the rules. So at some point you can say, no, this really didn't work well at all. We want to change it. So you're not the dictator anymore. You did it the last half year, but it didn't work out, so we do something different. And the last 2 basic rules there are, well, everybody should be allowed to leave the cooperation. So there should be no forced way that you can say, no, you have to stay. You know, you have a contract and you have to stay the next 2 years. I'm sorry, you have to do the work. No possibility to get out. And then finally, if you leave, you should not actually get punished for that. Like that all the others say, okay, you're leaving, but you have to pay 50,000 euros now, right? So in fact, it's so that it should be possible for the party leaving to say, I take something with me. And there's something very fortunate about free software projects here. This is actually by default somewhat the case. You can take the code base that you've contributed a lot to and fork, right? So the basic rule here is not so hard to fulfill. And if you have especially the last 2 points of being able to leave and being able to take something with you, then you have a very good plateau for negotiations. Nobody can really apply that much force. So these are really very interesting rules for any kind of collaboration at many levels. So how is the developer collaboration working concretely in PyPy? We do weekly meetings, 30 minutes, in the internet relay chat, because we are completely distributed. We are not working at one office. And it's, well, commit, version control, notifications. Everybody gets to see what everybody else does. It's all very transparent. And the 30-minute IRC meetings are very important. They have an agenda, and they say, okay, this week we want to discuss this, this, and this. And it can be delegated, but the main thing is 30 minutes, an agenda that is sent out before, and everybody who's active in that project should attend these meetings. And there you can make very quick decisions. That worked out very well, and it's also done by other projects and even companies. And then we have, for the developers, they are basically also represented in the technical board within this whole EU consortium structure. And that's something that is a bit of a formal thing, but it also means that there's influence on actually work planning, on looking at which things don't work well and we want to change something. And so there's some kind of representation of really the developers that we brought into the EU project. And then it's also true that we have a number of people who are very experienced. And that goes back to this kind of like dictatorship model idea or so. Everybody basically accepts that there are some people who are really very experienced and who can guide the project. They don't really have necessarily a formal role of being the decisive party, but they can actually say, okay, I know that this is actually a good path to go, and there's a lot of trust actually that this person has the experience to make this judgment. So it is, our whole development is guided in various areas by people knowing very much and being accepted by the others. Okay, there's also, and that's the EU part maybe a bit, when you have a contract with the EU, you actually have a consortium. And that's consisting of organizations, basically. And those is also some kind of collaboration. They also get together. We also have the IRC meetings there. And there's also, by now, there's commercial opportunities that some companies are realizing, and it's also an ongoing discussion between the companies on how to actually tackle this and how to operate in that area. So the consortium is, I mean, the project itself, with its like 350 subscribers to the technical development list, is a network of people. It's a lot of really persons knowing each other, working together. On the other hand, EU only funds organizations. So we have 7 so-called partners, and 3 of these partners were actually previously not involved with PyPy. We got them on board because we thought it's a good idea to have some partners in there who have some experiences with EU projects. And then 6 of these partners are only 50% funded. The 7th partner is a university. They get basically full funding. That's a general rule. So there are two companies actually were funded by developers in the project during the negotiation process in that 1 year, because the EU said, no, sorry, we cannot fund developers as consultants or something. It's not possible. It's freelancers, not possible. So basically, there had to be companies funded. And well, you can ask maybe in 1 year or so if that worked very well, but I think it's not too bad, actually. Okay, and that's just a picture of one of the our first consortium meetings in Saarbrücken. That was in December 2004, kind of like the kick-off meeting. And there's also some developers. One of them is also sitting here. And yeah, with this, I think I give over to Bea. Thanks.
Okay. First of all, is there any questions about the first part of the talk? Yes?
Always said that you first want to have the concepts right before start writing any code. How do you know that the concepts are right before you have written any code?
Yes, you answer that.
Yes, we know that the concepts are right because we have lots of tests, and we can take the tests from, that's the main thing, right? The tests from the existing Python implementations to see if we are compliant to the actual language definition, right? So there are like, I think, I don't know how many, also 3,000–4,000 tests from CPython, which is the main Python implementation. And we basically wrote our own tools to have all these tests run against our own implementation. So the main aim actually was getting this completely compliant, first make it correct. And that's a strong difference because many other approaches to Python implementation said speed, you know? They looked at a for loop and tried to make it as fast as possible. And then this was faster than CPython. And then they said, okay, now we try to make the language actually work. And that was the part where they failed, right? So.
Well, if I start up with a new project, which is something kind of new in the sense of, well, implementing a new concept or something like that,
right.
You can't just, well, you don't know if your concepts are right. So,
right. So you're saying that if you're doing something completely new invention of a project that doesn't connect to some existing specification, we could say the existing tests are some kind of specification we want to pass, right? So this is not applicable directly, indeed, to a project where you don't have any kind of specification. It's true.
Any more questions? Okay. Then let's delve a bit deeper into the actual Agile practices of the project. Now, Holger talked about the development process and the evolution of the project so far, very much the community. And test-driven development is one key Agile practice. That was a main thing in the Agile manifesto that was a group of people getting together early 2000 and explaining what they thought was the key paradigm for doing good software development. Now, there's a people factor to this as well, right? So it's not just about tools and automated testing, it's also about getting the people to their optimum, efficient, but also very interest-driven way of working. So how do you get people together to get them to work in a way that actually stimulates them? Now, their previous experience were previous software development practices, so they created the Agile practices. So let's look at the people factor. And here's a quote about Agile processes. They are designed to capitalize on each individual and each team's unique strengths. So how do you create something that allows every individual to do what they're interested in, but in a community and in a project structure that goes forward as well? Now, if you can create some kind of lowest level denominator structure for this, then you're on the right path. This is what the Agile practices is about. So many other traditional project management approaches are about structure, procedures, risk management and everything. This is about the lowest denominator for making sure that people can do their best, wanting to do their best as well. Now, if you look at the open source nature of teams, of course, at least from our experience in the Python community, is that they are very much self-organized. They are very much collaborative, intensely collaborative, not just in a community of a specific implementation, but also between, right? So in that sense, it fits the Agile definition of the people factor very well. But in some sense, it's also not fitting, because open source projects are unique implementations of Agile practices, because they work distributed. So if you have people sitting in South Korea, as we have people sitting in other parts of Asia, US, Brazil, Europe. Some are parts of the actual funded project, and some are part of the major community of PyPy. You know, that actually doesn't really work well with the definition of Agile practices. And in that sense, what we're going to talk about, sprints, is the medicine for that. It's the evolution within an open source context, right? So let's look at that. Okay, can you continue? Yeah. So if we look a bit about the key focus of Agile practices, the people factor, is that they want to reduce the cost of information, the time it takes for getting Carl to talk to Christian, to talk to Lena, to talk to Holger, to talk to me, and then getting everyone agreeing on talking to someone else, and then getting everything on board. This takes lots of time, especially in traditional hierarchical project management structures, right? So how can we do that? How can we escape this problem, all right? But also the distance from decision making, and not just the distance between the persons making the decisions to the persons implementing the decision, but also the time from when a decision is taken till you actually see the result. Now, this is indeed a problem if you have a hierarchical situation, but could also be a problem in a very loose structure as well. So how do you do this? Well, the Agile practices say that we need to be physically very close. Like not just in the same room, not just in the same house, specifically in the same room, rather very much sitting at the same computer, pair programming together. That kind of physical closeness reduces, because everyone can see what work is being done. You can just raise your head above your laptop and just see, yeah, they're working on that stuff over there. It reduces the cost of information very much. You can always shout a question to someone. Now, in that sense, it's difficult to shout from here to South Korea, right? So we have to use automated tools for that, but it fits quite well. An orthodox exchange of knowledge is that in traditional software projects and management practices, you have a very strong focus on documentation. You need to document everything. You need user requirement, and you need manuals, you need this and you need that. And developers think, what about documentation? Not very popular, right? So we have people who are being specialists at writing code. They're not specialists in writing documentation. So how do you reduce this problem? How do you take it away? Well, take pictures of your whiteboards in which you scribble things. Film people, like Vanya is doing. And the question, of course, is, are we allowed to just sweep across the audience to show this wonderful group of people listening to our project? Do you mind if we just do that during the talk? Because we're actually making a PyPy documentary as a film, in order to help reducing cost of information and market the project and the way we work. And also, it's about also filming, but having open archives of all email conversation and commit rights and everything, just to reducing this. So think creative when it comes to helping people to get into the project and reducing the learning curve, right? And as PyPy goes along, the learning curve is quite steep now. So we really need to think about this, and we're trying to do that as well. All this results, of course, in the actual increased team morale, you know, because if the levels are not that high and the steep curve is not there, and you feel that you can talk to the core developers really, and you get answers really quickly, that actually feels that you're allowed to participate in the community and in the project, and that makes people more interested and get them on board. So it's good for everyone. Okay. Yes, the origins of sprinting, and sprinting is the key methodology that we use for the people factor, like this leakage, this lack of physical working together. This is what we solve by sprinting. And Holger called them one-week programming meetings, and that is exactly what it is. But let's look a bit about where this comes from, and it's a fussy history, but this is what I've kind of found out so far. Like in the Agile community, not the open source community and not the traditional software community, but the specific Agile community, there actually is a methodology called Scrum. Yeah? And in this methodology, they work with 1 month-long iterations that they call sprints. And in this iteration, they focus on a specific increment, a specific load of work that they need to do. And they document this, they have daily meeting sessions and everything, and they document this in a kind of sprint backlog. What are we doing and when are we doing it? And they work for a month, they evaluate this iteration and this increment. Did we succeed? What we need to do, what will be the goals of the next sprint we're doing, and then they feedback that into the actual product, and then they go for the next iteration and next iteration. So these 1 month-long increments in Scrum is called sprints. Now, if you look what happened when this moved into the Python community, SOAP Foundation, actually in like 2002, around there, 2001, 2002, they made their own definitions. Because they were an open source community, SOAP Foundation used this first internally with their clients and then externally with the community for contribution. They couldn't allow 1 month-long programming sections, so they kind of did a more accelerated approach into 2 or 3 day focused development session in which developers pair off together in a room, focus on building a particular subsystem. That is the definition being used. So when you look at the Python community today, that's a typical sprint, 2 to 3 days. Now in the PyPy community, we had to evolve our own way of sprinting, and we're going to present that a bit here. So the entire project, as Holger said, started during sprints, these week-long meetings, this accelerated approach. Now, what we did, even before the project got funded, is we moved around, because we wanted a solidarity when it comes to cost, so not all people needed to travel all the time and pay for the cost. So we moved around to the different people that were willing to host us, and also making sure that they could participate, right? So it was, in that sense, it was stimulating the community building as well, right? Because people were allowed. I mean, if you wanted PyPy to come to your location, we would. You know, if you had facilities that we could use, we would be there, right? And when we got funded, we continued with this. It's a strategy. Every 6th week, we sprint somewhere in Europe, in the US, in Asia, as we will talk a bit about more. So some of the places we've been to sprinting is like this, yeah. Okay, so let's look a bit about what's specific for the PyPy sprints. Yeah, you can continue. Okay, so first of all, there's quite a lot of planning going into sprinting. It's not like, I mean, getting a group of people to the same place at the same time with a normal amount of cost, agreeing on what to do, having similar expectations, that takes a lot of planning. Where are we going to stay? Do we know people at that local place? Yeah. And are we going to stay at the university? What are the rough goals and activities we're going to do, right? So this actually is being planned on a developer level in the project, even the funded aspects as well. And the sprints are open for the entire PyPy community, and people outside of the PyPy community also visit our sprints as well, right? So we need to actually do this planning and do it well, and 1 month before the actual sprint, do a sprint announcement so people can plan and book tickets and see if they want to participate. And this is a picture from our sprint in Lausanne in Switzerland in January. So you can see maybe in the window there, lovely mountains, yeah. But it was a very nice little cabin, and we worked very well there and did lots of compliancy tests, if I remember things correctly. Yeah, it was really weird. This was my first sprint, and it was just lots of programmers there, and it was weird. Okay, let's continue. So, the actual doing, what happens when we do meet? Yeah, well, we have startup meetings, because when the people get together, we actually know it's around like 10 to 15 people, sometimes up to 20 people participating. Some of them are core developers, there's been there since 2003. Some of them have been to other types of sprints. Some of them doesn't know PyPy at all, but are very interested. So we need to do a startup meeting to making sure that all the goals are there and just a rough idea of what we're going to do. And then people pair off based on interest. And what we try to do is mix core developers with like junior people or people interested in PyPy, because it's about decreasing the learning curve, right? So, and then we have daily status meetings and with the different pairs, just like, yes, we're making progress, this is a real problem, okay, and then we restructure and reshuffle and say, yeah, Christian, you need to, maybe you can help them over there, yeah, we'll do that, and, you know, and we go on like that for a couple of days. And of course, the key technique here is pair programming, but we actually involved another version of pair programming, which is group programming, because we only have so many core programmers, right? So we need to have like one of them and maybe 3 people participating. So it turned more into a discussion group that actually sat and coded together as well, right? Okay. And then we have the closing, and this is a nice picture of this summer. This was the 0.7 release. It apparently involved alcohol and some core developers, so check that release out. And this is Holger and Samuel and Richard, and this is a very good mix, because here we have people in actual companies in the consortium, but we also have people from the community, and we also have people just recently involved in the community. So it just shows the mix of PyPy, that it's not really just a consortium. It's definitely a community, and we have different roles, right? And then we do closure meetings, like, did we achieve our rough goals? What work do we need to do until the next sprint? Yeah, okay, and we don't allocate specifically who's going to do that. We just leave it out to the developers, and they continue with their PyPy sync meetings in between, right, as Holger mentioned. And then we do a sprint report, which is very appreciated, because people off location wants to know what happens. What are you doing in that mountain cabin, you know? And we evaluate as well, okay? So it's not 2 to 3 days, because when we meet up every 6 weeks, we actually meet up for 7 days. And we have to have a break day in between, otherwise, you know, code wouldn't look very well. And in some sense, we had to evolve open sprints and closed sprints. Like just before a release, we kind of need people who are more into the actual PyPy code base, right? So the focus is not much on learning, but actual really tricky things that need to be done. So then we actually say, if you really want to learn about PyPy, you should come to this other sprint, in which the core developers are really there and can mentor you and everything, right? So that's why we talk about open sprints and closed sprints. And the sprints at conferences like PyCon in the US and also EuroPython, they are more tutorial. They turn more and more tutorial-like. In a sense, they're like a workshop, a programming workshop. So it's a great way of getting to know the project if you're interested. Yeah. So, and here you can see the number of subscribers. And you can see an effect here also what happens when we got EU funding. So over here, we're talking about, here's the summer, like this nice picture when they drank lots of alcohol and made the 0.7 release. Yeah, that's here. Apparently it was very creative as well. Yeah, and then we have sprints. And this is like, here, you can see EuroPython Gothenburg and start of EU funding. And then you see an actual result here. And the sprints are these meetings. And here you have, this is PyPy dev subscribers. So when we reach critical mass through the PyPy funding that we got from the EU, we could actually create so much work that the community evolved. So this is not just because we got money, it was because we could actually work focused on helping and mentoring the community. And of course it grew, right? And we invited people to sprints, and we're trying desperately to fund people to come to our sprints as well. Yeah, okay. So, the different cultures of the PyPy project. Now we're going to talk about some troubles, and because it wouldn't be realistic otherwise, right? It would all be mushy and yummy, and of course we have problems as well. This is the PyPy umbrella. Now, if you want to have a certain amount of people doing an EU-funded project, open source and agile, you need certain skills involved in the project, right? So we have people that have a strong open source Python culture perspective that is triggering them, that is their focus, right? They are used to working agile and distributed. This is their work style. This is also their values and interest, right? So we're talking about people now. And then we have people who are used to the EU project work style. And that is a separate culture, and they are driven by other perspectives and other values and have other experiences. And then we have the traditional project management culture as well. Both people who got burnt by traditional project management projects, but also knowing that there are some structures here that are actually good as well, right? And then you have the chaos pilot culture, which the company I work in come from, the action learning, trying to actually evolve processes within. And that is a new one to the community and also the project. And of course, that is our focus, and we bring that into the project. And then we also have the different national cultures, like people working from France and Germany and Sweden, and also like Brazil and South Korea and everything. So there's a whole bunch of different cultures stretching the community in different areas and also stretching the project, the funded project, focusing, fighting their different corners as well. Now, this creates problems, but also opportunities. So let's look a bit about them. Yeah. Now, in some sense, you have some kind of paradox here, because we want to have a developer-driven process, like the community was before it got funded. But we also need to have a formal project organization. How do we manage this, right? So we have to create formal structures with formal managers that weren't part of the community beforehand, that have formal roles. Like my role is assistant project manager, and we have a project coordinator and a project manager. But we also need to structure the core developers into a formal arena as well, in which they can make decisions that are formal on a project level, on a consortium level. And that is the technical board, which Christian and Holger are part of. And then we have the partners, the 7 organizations as well. They have their partner role. So Holger is not just a part of the technical board, he is also representing a partner and also has views and opinions and needs in that direction, as well as me. Now, a typical example of that is sprint organizing, because this is a key thing for the project, the EU-funded project. So in a sense, we should have one person really owning this. But that would break with tradition from how we worked previously in the community. So we still have no formal role and responsibility for sprint organizing, because it doesn't work that way. And it would be wrong to create a structure there. So that's an example of trying to balance this. And also planning and focusing on technical tasks, right? So we have our work packages, the 14 work packages, the 58 deliverables, but we also have the different needs of the community, right? So we have formal needs to deliverables, but we also have the interest-driven aspects, and we need to have a balance here. So this is a constant risk, because all this comes back to that if we want to have a developer-driven process, we have to allow the developers to actually do their work, like channeling their unique strengths, right? So in that sense, this is, of course, added work on them. Because if they want added room, they have to collaborate and organize themselves, but also integrate with the consortium level. And this is a risk, of course, yes. Another balancing problem is we want to work agile, right? We want also to conform to the formal EU requirements, because they actually fund us to do stuff, right? So we have our written high-level requirements. As Holger said, it was a good thing to do. It was good to do it. But also, we need to conform to those. But in the same time, if we feel now that, oops, there's a new Python release, we might go change our concept in a different way. We have to, the change control structures with the EU are quite complicated. It involves contractual amendments and stuff like that. It takes quite a lot of months, very unagile, okay? So in that sense, we have a constant risk of missing opportunities from within the community saying that this is more interesting now, we should go in this direction. We might agree, but we still have a contract with the EU, right? So this is also a balancing problem, yes? And then we have, of course, the actual open source community and their needs, and then you have the hierarchies for conceptual integrity. And this is a quote from Fred Brooks, The Mythical Man Month. And of course, it's over 20 years old, but it's unfortunately still actual today, right? So conceptual integrity are represented by the core developers, the architects of the idea, the person giving birth to the vision of PyPy, okay? And we can't just let it loose. They wouldn't agree that PyPy suddenly turned into some kind of COBOL implementation or something, you know? Like if the majority of the community would think like that, yeah, and we would have a conflict within the community. So this conceptual integrity is structured so that they have a formal arena in the project, and that is the technical board. Now, I've listened to some talks in this conference, and regularly I hear about projects in which the core developers didn't allow anyone to influence the process, and constantly forked because core developers weren't able to talk to the community, evolve the community, and actually listen to the community and have a balance there. So this is also a risk, because we can't just shut the door to the community. We are the community as well, but we need to handle our different hats and roles, right? So we have a constant risk of also unbalancing the community. Okay, a little hitchhiker's guide to the galaxy. This is the man on the moon. It's often used when you talk in traditional project management practices about the importance of having a shared vision, yeah? Okay, so if you have all these different cultures, and they all think about what would it mean to bring a man to the moon, you know, they might have this picture, but it will look in totally different ways in their different heads, right? So how do we get them to actually proceed to put a man on the moon, to make a PyPy implementation? And this is a problem, of course. So let's continue. So we will go a bit abstract here. We'll take an analogy with the solar systems, right? So these different cultures in PyPy, they might live and act from different planets, right? So we need to have dynamic confrontations depending on our different perspectives. So just an example is that we can live on the same planet, right? On the same continent, yeah? But we could also experience that, oh, that person is way out there, you know, living on a totally different planet. That's like Mars. Oh, I can really understand that. But it could also sometimes be experienced as, hey, I mean, what solar system are you where are you now? I really don't follow you anymore. That's like the Andromeda galaxy or something. And this is, you know, a problem when you talk about cultures, but it's also an opportunity. So let's look a bit about this. Okay, so if you look about working with people from the same planet, it's mostly okay. I mean, you have like a common center. Everyone can see the sun, right? The shining PyPy implementation in the future. And they're generally shared perspective that this is a good thing, right? And okay, this is the project success. But looking at the sun from like Russia or Maine, Brazil or whatever gives a different perspective on how you actually need to go to reach the shining PyPy implementation in the sky, right? So that's hard. And the different solutions to getting to that place means that we have friction. You know, what is the best solution? Building a bridge, building a rocket, whatever, you know. Different places gives different views and different solutions. And this creates friction. So we need to explore. What is it to live on that continent? Now, let's take it to the different level. Let's add some complexity. We are not looking at it from a same planet. We're sitting on Earth, and someone is sitting on Mars. And that shiny PyPy implementation in the sky, that is the sun, is looking a bit different. You know, from Mars, it's a bit like over there, right? And from Earth, it's a bit like over there. So we can see it, but it's further away, and we're further away from each other, and it's different working styles, because there are different environmental aspects from working from these different perspectives. So it's harder, and it's more friction, because the cultures are too far away. So we need to explore and add and do quite a lot of work to actually understand each other. So we come back to the cost of information, because we all look at information in different ways. So let's add another complexity, Holger. Different solar systems. So like the shiny PyPy implementation in the sky really looks different if you're in the Milky Way galaxy and if you're in the Andromeda galaxy. Really, really, they can't even see the shiny PyPy implementation in the sky. So, I mean, that really creates problems. Also, when you're within the same consortium and structure, right? So in that sense, you can perceive the others and their cultures and their interests as alien, as a threat. And you start building up defense mechanism because it really sounds weird to you, and it's the totally wrong solution, you know? It's totally wrong, and I mean, we can't go that way. It will not bring us to project success. So it's even harder, and it takes even more time to explore. And the question you need to ask yourself, if you perceive the cultural differences being as this big, as different solar systems, you need to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? Is this culture needed within this project? Or is it too much effort going into actually understanding them? You know, is it too much friction? And that is a very valid question that you constantly need to ask, okay? So, the universal truth and also our experience is that all these different cultures have strengths. You just need to actually make sure that you have processes in which they are allowed to contribute their strength. often the intentions are good, even from aliens, right? So we have these confrontations. Let's make sure that they're dynamic instead of defensive, right? And the challenge is to try to find a fitting model. And also, what are we talking about? The shiny pipeline implementation in the sky. So having that clear goal is very important. Okay. So in that sense, also, it's not just within the project. We also need to be able to talk to other projects. That also brings other perspectives. But we do have a good cooperation with SOAP Europe and also Canonical. We listen to how they're working and what practices they use, and also try to implement them and evolve them and also give back to them. So if you're sitting on practices that you think work in your open source communities or your projects, please let us know, because we're very interested. And we're also very interested in telling about our practices that we think work. And we also try to reach out to universities, reaching out to students, also companies, to listen into how they're working, but also spread our way of working. And also, we recently started a semi-cooperation with Alan Kay, the creator of Smalltalk and open object-oriented languages, and he's interested in the PyPy approach. So we're trying to listen into all these larger accepted experts out there as well. And then last CCC conference, we started a cooperation with a company called Impara that works a lot with Squeak. So we're actually looking actively into how can we expand the community in different ways and bring in other cultures into the community. Okay. So conclusion, food for thoughts, is that, it's a tricky thing, this umbrella of PyPy. But if you do have a shared but also challenging vision, because it can't be easy. If it's easy, it's not stimulating. So that won't, kick people, into action. So also you need to respect the different cultures and exploit them and exploit the strengths. This is really important. Like, I need to respect that there's been a history in the project, that there is an open source culture. I need to be interested in that and curious. I also need the others to be interested in my background and the things I bring into the project. If we have that, we're in a good way. If we're not, if we're defense-oriented, it won't work. So then we need to design this lowest denominator of structures and constantly evolve and change those, like Christopher Spear says in his work. And room for group learning and creating change, not just reacting to it. And if you're stuck in the defense-oriented way of working, you're mainly reacting to change, and you're also defending against change. And that is the opposite thing of thinking of agile work. So we need to also be the persons who actively create change, and making that fit in an EU funding structure as well. So, year 2, this was year 1, experiences of PyPy. And year 2, we have to survive our EU review in the 20th of January in Brussels, in which we tell the EU funding people in the Commission that this is what we did with your project money, and we are happy with the results, are you? And receive some feedback from their panel of independent experts. We also want to improve, as this hour has been about, constantly improve how we work with the community, how we work with contribution and collaboration. And we want to think about what happens when we're not funded anymore. Do we want to continue as a consortium? Do we want to have this structure? Should it be something else? Are there commercial opportunities for us out there? And we also need to sprint. And we're visiting Mallorca and the university there in January. We're going to PyCon in Texas. We're also sprinting in April in Tokyo, meeting the Free Software Initiative in Japan, who has been gracious enough to host us there, etc., etc., etc. So, this was a bit about PyPy, and if you're interested, there are some links here. Are there any questions? Yes?
You mentioned some problems. Can you say what were the biggest problems you had to deal with?
My first question is on which level? On the consortium level, development level, community level?
Developer level.
Developer level. Well, this, we talk about conceptual integrity, right? And we have core developers. Fortunately, we are very fortunate that there is a good spirit in the community, and they are, as Holger said, accepted. But if, in some sense, we are people stretching. They want the PyPy implementation to take certain steps in certain directions, of course. And we need to think about the EU aspects. And this constant, but there's a good dialogue in that. It's not a problem. It is a risk, maybe, because if we're not listening, we could actually kill the community. So it's more about being risk-aware and giving the opportunity for people having different ideas to try them out within the community context. Yeah?
I mean, one concrete aspect, for example, is recently we have had releases where we basically also follow the structure of the EU project because it's our research ambitions. And then there's the community saying, okay, this is now very, very interesting because you have a compiler that can actually translate Python programs to something that runs 50 times faster than CPython. right? So that's very interesting, and you should actually focus on releasing this tool just by itself, not as like part of the whole PyPy project. So there are discussions about this. There are some people who say, yes, it's a good idea, the community wants this, it's very useful. And there's other people saying, well, we have like really challenging goals ahead in the next year to actually fulfill our obligations, you know. And it is challenging, we actually want to do that. And they feel this is something that goes in a different direction. And if you have like 6 or 7 people who are really very much into the project and have to actually glue the whole work together, they of course feel this kind of friction in a different way. Because it basically means holidays, gone, you know, there's no holidays and stuff like this. And in that sense, that is such a conflict. It's not a conflict that is not resolvable or so, but it's, well, requires discussion, right?
Any more questions?
Yes? Have you already, or are you willing to open source your planning of the sprints, like requirements, like you organize them, like everything you need to do around to get the sprint working?
Let's put it like this. Everything in the PyPy project is under the MIT license. So the way we're working, the tools we create, besides the shiny PyPy implementation, is of course free. So on our website, we have documentations about the development methodology. In our reports to the EU that we submitted now, we actually explain how we're doing it because we want other open source projects to be actually shorten their learning curve and maybe get interested in the way we're working. So everything is open and you're welcome to contact us. And we're even interested in visiting and inviting people to our sprints and make that into a learning session, not just about PyPy, because they might be very interested in their own language implementations, but they want to see how we work. So you're actually very welcome to join a sprint just to do that. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Then I would like, oh yeah, question. Yes?
So my question is more related to your talk yesterday. Is it okay
Cool.
to ask it now?
Yes?
I'm really amazed by the idea of client-side Python scripting. And you were talking about Java, you were talking about PyPy running on JavaScript. Will it get stable any time in the future, or will it always be experimental?
Well, it's not about running PyPy on JavaScript. I mean, we generate code that runs in the browser, right? And I think we should discuss the details after that because it's basically time for the next talk, and it's not exactly fitting to the talk. But like I said, PyPy is not going to be, I mean, you will not have a Python prompt in a browser. Well, that's not quite true. Maybe you get it in some way, but it's not something that is also the main effort, but one of the participants actually gave a talk at OSCON in Amsterdam about this, and there's some experimentation actually in also having stackless JavaScript in a normal browser. I think working in Internet Explorer and Mozilla. So there's like various areas where people are experimenting, but it's a bit of a side project in some sense.
And maybe we can continue the discussion outside. So.
Yes.
Okay, our time is up. I would like to thank you. Apparently there was a party, so maybe you're all hungover, but thank you for listening. And of course, you're welcome to contact us. And thank you for your attention. Bye.